Welcome to All the Things, a podcast for moms seeking an inspired life. Hi, I'm your host, Lisa Chin. I am a writer and a coach, and my most passionate truth is that the world needs the real you. That's why I created this podcast, to discover all the things that make us who we are. Because the better we understand ourselves, the more good we can do in the world. So, let's do that together. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode with my guest, Jonathan Roberts. I am super excited to be sharing this space with him. Jonathan is the owner and director of the South Shore Piano School in Quincy, Massachusetts, really not far from where I am. A passionate educator, Jonathan's work revolves around not only teaching music, but also incorporating creativity, possibility, and skill building into students' everyday lives. Jonathan maintains an active blog on the South Shore Piano School website and is also the host of South Shore Piano, a podcast about how music education changes lives. And I have been lucky enough to be one of the guests on that podcast. Jonathan, welcome today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, before we get started, I want to first acknowledge that I am speaking and podcasting from the traditional and unceded territories of the Nipmuc and Massachusetts tribes. And today's conversation will touch so much on creativity and art and really, I think, the culture of music. And it would really not be a complete conversation without recognizing that there is so much, especially because we kind of share a geographic location,
Right.
without acknowledging that this conversation really would not be able to take place without the stewards of this land that came before us. So,
Absolutely.
Jonathan. Now, where do we start? Let's introduce the audience to kind of who we are, because I think that this is one of the things I love about our modern day relationships. Can you share a little bit about our relationship?
Oh, absolutely. So we both live in the same area. We never met each other until we both ended up in the same marketing seminar. And we clicked pretty much immediately, helping one another with our projects, you with your projects, you with mine. You've had such a substantial impact on my work as an entrepreneur, as a creative, as a outside the box thinker. And we've just stayed connected ever since, just, meeting periodically, exchanging ideas. And it's been a really awesome synergy. So thank you for that, Lisa.
Oh, well, I mean, I remember reading one of your first posts and I was like, oh, it's really cool. He owns a piano school. And then I saw that you were in Quincy. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's right there. And I'm like, we haven't met in person yet. And I really look forward to the day that we actually can
Yes.
have a coffee together or something
Totally.
like that. But yeah, I mean, we've kind of known each other for about a year now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
And really, I mean, I feel like one of the great the conversations we talk about, we talk about a lot of different topics, but like creativity and parenting and like the overlap of it and like the interplay of those two things has been so much a part of what we've talked about.
totally.
One thing I wanted to start the conversation off with is, what do you see? You have started a piano school. You were a piano teacher before you started the piano school.
Right.
So you've observed, I mean, you've worked with a lot of children. I mean, you teach adults too, but you've worked with a lot of children, and you have seen like parents' impact on the child's creativity and development and interest in music. Can you share a little bit about like kind of what you've observed?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to make it as short as I can. I can turn it into a few hours, I think. But I've come to appreciate over the years that the parents' relationship with their kids is pretty much the make it or break it, whether kids will succeed in music lessons. It's, the parents are the ones who find a good teacher, make the payments for the lessons, make sure their kids are on time, make sure they practice. And ultimately it comes down to, I've found, whether parents really, really value this and want their kids to play, for the long haul, or if they're just kind of seeing it as sort of a temporary, just sort of an extracurricular activity that's just kind of gonna sort of come and go. But almost by definition, a child can't succeed with music if a parent is not dedicated to that. Otherwise, like a 9-year-old can't, drive themselves. to a lesson and all that kind of thing. But it's been interesting though seeing the dynamic in sort of our modern culture. I think we live in a time. There's been no harder time to like learn a piano, learn a musical instrument, because of all the demands on families, all the demands that are on kids. Everything's just moving faster and faster and faster. So where I've found that music lies kind of in a unique place in kids' activities is that when you think about the other things that they participate in, there's either a really tough accountability system, so that's like school, where they have to do this activity. Yeah, they're building some skills along the way, building some study skills, learning some things, but if you hold a gun to somebody's head, you'll get them to do anything. That's probably not the best analogy, but there's a pretty severe accountability system, so kids don't have a choice with that. And then most of kids' other extracurriculars is a huge social component, especially when it comes to sports. So if a child, stops the soccer team or, doesn't do the school team, there's like a big social stigma there. So where music kind of sits in its own place, where the parent devotion is just so critical, is that it's in its own little space of, it's not as social as their other activities. Most practicing happens alone at home. And we don't do grades. We don't grade the lessons. This isn't going to appear on their transcript. So it's literally a test of a student's and a family's ability to build a skill that's not going to be graded and that nobody's going to know about if they quit. So I think it's a real test of that. I could probably go on, but I'll stop there.
I hadn't ever really thought of it like that, and it really does kind of fit into this special little spot in kind of the plethora of choices out there for a child to participate in. When you are talking about, the parents' commitment, I mean, I don't have experience with this, and but like as a teacher in your observations, like what happens if a child really doesn't want to play? Should the parent continue? Because like there's all these like great stories about whoever is a famous musician and their parents like told them they should play and they played for however long and whatever. But like, is that really the route to go, or how do you best cultivate a love for the arts, which is what your whole objective is?
It's a really, really great question. I think at the heart of it is figuring out, if a child wants to stop lessons, figuring out why they want to stop. And a lot of that comes down to how we teach. Because if you think of a child's skill set as being sort of like a circle, you want to challenge them like just at the edge of that or just a little on the outside of that. And that's our challenge as teachers, good teachers, to figure out that sweet spot of like just the right amount of challenge where it's manageable and exciting for kids, but it's not overwhelming. If you go too far outside that circle, then it's going to be frustrating and kids aren't going to want to keep going. It kind of ceases to be music at that point and it's just this puzzle to be solved. But if you're too far inside the circle, then it gets boring because it's easy for the child. So usually if a student is not wanting to continue, I want to dig deeper into figuring out the why behind that. Is it the materials too hard? Or is it just a matter of the culture? What I'll typically encourage parents to do is to dig deeper into the school schedule, because most often I would say a good like 80% of the time when students want to stop, it's because they're flooded with so many other demands on their time. So they have their school, they have their homework, they have sports, like all of that's like pretty much a non-negotiable. And when students feel sort of overwhelmed with this, the idea of sitting down for 30 minutes and having like a totally focused, clear a productive practice session, it's really hard for kids. And as parents, it's hard for us to relate to that because being a kid now is totally different than it was 20 years ago. So I'll typically, recommend to parents to look at the schedule. Let's make sure that everything's like within, the child's skill set, adjust things there, see if things can be adjusted with the schedule. And then this is where I find that the dedication and willingness of the parents to play ball really is the make it or break it. Because it comes down to whether a parent is willing to do that, to help, be their child's accountability partner, make sure they're setting the practice. And then if we have everything in the right place, if, it's the right amount of skill, the kid's enjoying the music, their schedule is intact, then usually, it's not a problem to begin with. But if it reaches that point, there's usually some righting the ship still. I often tell parents when I was a kid, I didn't want to practice. It was the same thing. I would get home from school. I would, have a ton of homework projects. Wasn't a sports kid, but I had plenty of other stuff on my plate. And there were lots of times that I just didn't want to practice. But it was just a rule of the household that when I got home from school, it was straight to the piano, hour practice. No ifs, ands, or buts. So if I talked back, if I didn't do it, there were consequences associated with that. I feel like not these days that would be considered kind of harsh from a parenting perspective. But then if that weren't there, I probably would have quit early on. So I'm very thankful for that. So that's usually a story that I bring up with parents. It's extremely rare this happens, but the only time that I'll actually suggest maybe a break is in order is if for whatever reason it's becoming so stressful that there are like fights and tears at home, and it's literally like just becoming a stressful pain point for families. Again, it's so rare that that happens, but that's really the only circumstance that I would suggest sort of like taking a break and coming back to it later.
I mean, it is a really tough balance, right? Because as a parent, you can see I mean, this can be applied in a million different ways, but as a parent, you can see the future, you can see the bigger picture of it. Whereas a child is like, in this moment, I have no desire to sit at this piano right now.
Yes.
When you said earlier, to you talked about like a good teacher. How do you find a good teacher? Like, I mean, we've talked about this one-on-one personally before. Like, how would you define a good teacher? What are questions you would ask to make sure that the instructor that you're hiring is going to meld with your child and also has like a philosophy? I think that's probably another point of view around there too.
Yeah, that's a really, really excellent question because, so many parents just sort of pick, whatever option is the most convenient or whatever is at the sort of price point they have in mind for, what piano lessons should cost, and then just kind of hope for the best. And the other challenge in this field is that there's no licensing requirement to teach music. Like anybody can put an ad in the newspaper and say $10 an hour for lessons without a degree, without a license, and that is 100% legal, which makes it harder for the better teachers who are at a more premium price point. But to find a good teacher, I think you already hit on a lot of it, is just asking the teacher what is your philosophy on teaching. I think that question alone separates the people who are just fresh out of school trying to make some money on the side, and the people who have like really dug deep into this to think about like what the bigger picture is for your kids, because presumably when people sign their kids up for lessons, it's in the hope that they'll play this for the long term. So asking the teacher, what their philosophy is, what their approach is to teaching. This is another big one, because really the publishing industry has made millions, if not billions, of dollars in creating method books to sort of release the teacher from any sort of thought or critical thinking. So, even an inexperienced teacher can just take, the first level of a method book and say, okay, here, play this first piece. Okay, great. Let's turn the page. Let's go to the next one. Really without any bigger picture of, okay, how do children's brains work? How do they learn? What do they do if they're having trouble with this? What is the learning model that we're going after here? So I think asking a teacher what their approach is so that their kids will learn this for the long term and understand it, and then making sure that the teacher explains that in such a way that you, the parent, understand that I think that's a real key thing, because if a teacher comes back with all kinds of high level abstract stuff and you as a parent don't understand that, then that's just not going to work, because it's really I think of it as a triangle. So you have the parent, the teacher, and the student, and all three really need to be working together close to make this happen. And then finally, I think asking the question of what additional opportunities do you offer your students is a big one. So the sort of traditional lesson model is you go to your one-on-one lesson and then you go home and practice by yourself. And then the next week you go to your one-on-one lesson and you go home and practice by yourself. And I think this is a big reason why a lot of kids quit, because in the context of kids' other activities, music lessons seem like a relatively isolating and lonely experience. if they don't have some other opportunities. So, asking if there are recitals, if there are workshops, if there's any opportunity for them to meet other kids is a big one. And that's the one that I think is a bit more rare. It's pretty typical for a lot of schools and studios to do maybe like one big end of the year recital, or maybe like a holiday recital and end of the year recital. So at South Shore Piano School, we really wanted to go the polar opposite swing. So we do two recitals every month, which I think has been a real, I won't say game changer, because we've done it for a while. It's not like a totally new thing, but seeing the students who participate in this regularly, they get to know other families. They feel like they're part of a community, and not just kind of showing up to this place to take lessons. And we've definitely seen a big correlation between the students who participate in these things on the regular, making it more of a significant experience, and then the students who, for whatever reason, just don't. They're the ones that are more likely going to take a break or stop when things get busy.
I was going to just segue into asking your about the philosophy of your school, but I first want to actually dive into this two recitals a month, because
Sure.
when I think of a recital, my heart almost kind of tightens up, right? Since you've introduced kind of these two recitals a month, like not even a year or half the year, like but a month, how does that change the idea of performance?
Again, it comes back to like our perception versus kids' perception, because to us, that idea of a recital, and I've thought about maybe changing it just so it doesn't sound as intimidating. It really hasn't been a huge issue though. But for us adults, it's like, oh, this is going to be like this stressful thing. But for 4, 5, 6, 7 year olds, it's just sharing their stuff and having fun and being the star of the show. They don't have any sort of they don't have the same sort of inhibitions that we adults do, as you know. Basic. So I'm always encouraging parents, the younger you can get kids in, the more performing is just going to be part of their lives.
I really love that, because if you think about like sports, they perform every week,
Right.
sometimes multiple times a week as you get older. So why should it be any different? Except I always think like recitals, for even like the organizational standpoint, it just would be so much to pull together. But if you have a system and you bring it all together, I love that. I really do. Do you remember like how you came up with that idea?
Yes. So this goes back to sort of my own experience taking lessons. So I had a couple of teachers in the beginning who I would consider sort of average teachers, and then my first sort of significant teacher that made this, this sort of started me on this long-term trajectory for life. It was at a community music school who did this same thing. It did not two recitals a month, but it was one recital every month, and I played for every single one of them. So that really went a long way in helping me meet other kids who are also doing piano, helping me work on my performing skills, performing in public. And especially like years later, as I've worked in other organizations. I've worked in organizations that do just the one recital at the end. I've worked in another organization that did one recital a month, and I just found it was almost without exception the students who stopped were the ones who didn't perform, where it was just sort of like a lonesome experience, or it was just a pay per service kind of a thing. The school that I worked with that only did the one recital at the end of the month, or at the end of the year, I just remember thinking like it's going to be like another year before before any of these kids get to perform again. It just seems like so far in between. So we actually did one recital a month when we first opened, but then when the pandemic began, this was March 2020. Most of a lot of my colleagues were sort of in like survival mode, like let's figure out what we need to do to survive. It was kind of like dark skies kind of a thing, and we actually had a recital scheduled for the very next weekend when the lockdown started. And we decided when that happened that we were going to go the polar opposite direction and like lean hard into making this online thing a really an exceptional, remarkable experience. So when the lockdown happened, I sent in the announcement to everybody that the recital this weekend's canceled, but we're doing a virtual recital next weekend. So get your videos ready and send them here. Oh yeah, and we're gonna do it every 2 weeks. And that really got the excitement up. I think we were actually the first community music school in the whole country to do a virtual recital. It was on YouTube. And part of it was, of course, we wanted to survive and we wanted to, keep as many students as we can. And we did lose some. It was definitely a major, like, sort of litmus test for families' dedication and how much they were willing to, like, stick with this when we had to go completely online. But we really wanted to take it as an opportunity to live by example, because we're always teaching our students how to persevere and think creatively, to come out on the other end stronger. So it was really an opportunity for us to live by example with that through, the events of our organization. And I think it definitely made a big difference. So we were doing YouTube virtual recitals, and then we switched over to Zoom. And we really felt like our population was growing as well. So that also sort of reinforced this idea that we really need to have two every month, just because, if we have 50 on one, that's going to be like a 3-hour recital, which, even with the best performances, that's a lot to sit through. So that's kind of led up to now. So now that we're back in person, we're keeping the 2 recital a month groove, because it's really been such a significant opportunity for students and their families. We're doing one live one and one Zoom recital every month, because we still have a fair number of families that are online. We want to make sure they have the opportunity as well. But it's also really cool for their families, because if we have some students with family in India or Germany or wherever, and they can tune in for their kids' recitals, which has been really, really cool.
I really love that. I think it's
Thanks.
just kind of throws it all like upside down, right?
Right.
Um and like kind of makes you think like, why are the other things normal?
Right.
I think that folks kind of have an idea, but like, would you be able to, like, if I was interviewing you as a teacher, oh, and I said, can you share with me your philosophy, your school's philosophy, and your philosophy as a teacher? Can you share what your answer would be?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're all about teaching kids the skills so that they can play music for life. So we don't teach, I mean, yes, we teach songs and pieces and stuff like that, but it's all with a longer trajectory. And we make sure that you as the parent are informed of like what we're doing with your kids, so that there is a path from here to when Sally is in her 30s and having a dark time, she can just sit at the piano and pull out a piece of music she loves and just be able to play, because we taught the skills for her to be able to do that, to develop her ear, to move to rhythm, to read music, all of it. And when we're teaching students, we're really teaching using research-backed, methodologies of teaching, and also very organic forms of teaching, especially with the younger kids, like age 3, 4, 5, 6. We use really two styles of teaching. One is Suzuki, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, or they've at least heard it, maybe don't know exactly what it is. And then another that we dabble in is called music learning theory. They're both almost identical with some subtle differences, but it's essentially taking students who have never played before and using the language learning model. So if you think about like when your kids were born, they observe their parents speaking. There's that magical day when they say their first word, and then they start copying other words that they hear. Eventually they start using that vocabulary to form their own sentences, thoughts, ideas. And it's really only after they're basically fluent, or at least fluent enough to have conversations, that we stick a book in front of them and start learning how to read, because at that point they're seeing the visual representation of this vocabulary they've lived with for a while. So with piano, we basically try to mirror this same model of learning, especially with the younger students, but even with some of the older students as well. Because what happens with a young child, if you put a method book in front of them, which a relatively inexperienced teacher would do, if you take a 5-year-old and say, okay, this is the staff, and there are 5 lines and 4 spaces, and here's this note with the line through it, that's middle C. Oh, and when the notes go up, that's to the right, and when they go down, it's to the left. Okay, here's your song, let's start. Like that, to a 5-year-old, it ceases to be music. It's just this Rubik's Cube puzzle to decode. So we're really all about meeting students where they are in their development and making sure we teach them in the most developmentally appropriate way possible. So they're basically learning the language and developing those skills so that over time they'll have this. Our best hope for our students is that they're going to play for the rest of their lives, not that they're just going to play until like 8th grade and then never touch it again, or even graduate till high school and then just forget about it. We want to equip them with the skills so that in the best times, in the worst times, they can just sit at their keyboard, their piano, pick up a piece of music they want to learn, and be able to learn it.
so you're a parent right now,
Right.
as well as a teacher, and you're kind of steeped in this world of creativity. I was curious to know, like, how do you approach creativity now as an adult personally? Because there's this whole work component of it, and I feel like that there's an outlet there, but like personally, do you have a creative practice?
I've recently dabbled into other areas aside, outside of music, but all as it sort of relates to my business and my life. I've definitely become a huge fan of writing every day. I never considered myself a writer before, but I started while we were in our seminar together. We I started a daily blogging practice every single day, just a short a short blog. Sometimes it feels like a blob. So
Me too.
just a short blog post. I think we have maybe 11 dedicated readers, which that's all that's all that matters. Just sort of with ideas on life and creativity and stuff like that. And I think what that's helped me with a lot is in appreciating this idea that when you just do the practice, when you just do the work, whatever that may be, it's not only helpful for the audience, whoever is reading it, that it connects with, but it also helps you sort of inform your own ideas about life and how you see the world and things like that. So I've really found, in these past, I think I'm on post like 286 or something like that since I started. But just that sort of daily reflection and writing has really helped sort of inform my ideas about the world, as far as how, creativity works and how important it is to think outside the box and things like that. So I might, as part of my work, I might just spend like 15 minutes thinking like, okay, let me list as many crazy ideas as I possibly can for, South Shore Piano School, for like, events, or, to reach more students, or or for an interesting YouTube video, things like that. So that's one thing. I've also done a lot of video stuff for the YouTube channel. Been on a little bit of a hiatus in the last few months, but if you check out the YouTube channel, there's everything from the practical and useful to the borderline crazy videos, especially during the pandemic. That was one of my, during summer of 2020, that was one of my big projects. I challenged myself to do a video a day for 30 days, which was hard, but it definitely pushed me as far as the creativity elements go. And again, that really informs me, and I feel like it makes me a better teacher and a better director because I've experienced this growth through a religious practice every day in other areas. So I'm always telling students all the time now, it doesn't matter like whether it's piano or your fitness or your health or your relationships, whatever, you have to do the thing every day, even when you don't feel like it, and then you're going to see your skills grow. So I really think having those practices, those sort of non-music practice, even though it all sort of ties back into my work, I think it's really helped me appreciate all the more how much how important it is to maintain that level of dedication every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes.
I think it's what's really interesting is that you're creating these things that are out there, they're public, but the gain you've actually received from it, from what you're sharing, is mostly internal. Like the fact that you have been blogging daily or doing these various videos, some of which are definitely borderline pushing the envelope on what's funny and what's serious. But but it is, it feels like what you're saying is that they're like these recitals, right? That these children are sitting and they're publicly putting out there. But and it's hard to say with children, right? Like you can't get into their heads.
Right.
And they probably couldn't verbalize it fully, but like there must be this other like internal component, like the regular practice of a recital would very much be the equivalent of like putting out like a daily blog post or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And like I was saying before, the students who participate regularly, we have some students who will do it like every month or every other month. As soon as they have something even, we try to get their music as polished as we can. But if we have to choose between having them perform something that's like almost there, like borderline there, and like waiting until the next month when they've like had it learned and they're just kind of sick of it, we'll just encourage them to just do it and just have that practice of getting in front of an audience. And it makes it carry more meaning. I think it comes down to whether students keep music to themselves. We often hear students or parents say, well, he doesn't want to do recitals, he just wants to play for himself. Inevitably, those are the students who end up stopping after a year or
Mhm.
two. Compared to the ones who share it, it carries more meaning for their families. It carries more meaning for them having shared it, and it really, it helps their self-esteem as well. Being able to, do this thing in front of an audience of 50 strangers that full-grown adults struggle with.
There's this powerful component of like art and performing and music being like a community practice. And you shared a little bit about that with me. Can you expand on that and share with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the recitals, it's interesting because when you go to a concert like at Symphony Hall or something like that, it's this astounding music, world class music, and the audience is changed in that moment, but then the concert's over. And I think for the I don't know if performers necessarily see it like this. This is one reason I wanted to go more the teaching route than the performing route. But the performer, while they connect with the audience, they don't, the relationship's over when the when the concert's over. You know what I mean? And same thing for the audience. So I feel like with our recitals for the students, we really keep it casual. We try not to, it's not a show up in shorts and sneakers kind of a thing, but we do try to keep it, casual. So it's not coming off as this thing that's only for the good kids or whatever. And we do really outside the box things as well. Like we had our first live recital a couple weeks ago, and in sort of honor of the last live recital we had before the lockdown, we had a joke contest in the middle of the recital, which in a typical recital setting would be considered like blasphemous. Like you tell any like conservatory, oh yeah, I think I want to put a joke contest in the middle, shake things up. You'd be like thrown out, kind of a thing. But we're trying to reinforce the spirit of like music is about sharing. It's not about it being perfect. It's not about being the best. It's just about sharing what you've worked on with an audience and connecting with other people. So that's why I'm always encouraging. We're always encouraging my colleagues and I, students to participate regularly, because inevitably they start to see other students again and again and again, and they feel like they know other people that are doing this thing. By contrast, the model that has less frequent recitals or even no recitals, I've come to appreciate more and more that like in that child's world, they're the only one they know that plays the piano. You know what I mean? And that's an extremely different experience than the one who's able to participate in these opportunities.
I think that's just so beautiful. Particularly this part about like not having them dress up. Like you think, because that's part of it, like having a recital, it's really serious. And anytime we had a concert for school, we would always have to wear black and white or whatever the attire called for, was called for at the moment. But I think breaking it down like breaks down the this like general stereotypes. Like you're like kind of anti-stereotype right now, like what
Right.
you're sharing with me. It goes against what the model of music that, and I didn't do private lessons growing up. I had school. I was in the school orchestra and the chorus, and we would always get dressed up, and we would, it was a big thing. Um, and I think about what you're sharing about like how you're kind of making it for everyone, and that makes like having a child, like let's just say like who is low income or just doesn't come from like a privileged background where he can just buy a new shirt or she can buy a new dress, right, for the event, and actually just making it where it's like you're flattening that that barrier for someone to feel like they need to belong or to participate in music
Right.
and making it for everyone. I think that's just a really beautiful thing.
Thank you. And in a way, I like to think of it as a return to where we came from, because centuries ago, music really was a social thing. Like every house had a piano in it, playing. Half of the time it was for dancing. It wasn't like always this sort of highbrow, formal occasion. And even in say like Mozart's time, it was the tradition to be able to just come in and out of the concert hall as you please. You could bring in food, you could drink, you could applaud whenever you want. Even Mozart was known for in his keyboard concertos to actually factor in silences in the piano part to allow room for the audience to just applaud like mid recital. Now, if you go to symphony hall, like if one person claps between movements of a concerto that like just doesn't understand, the tradition, they're immediately sort of like scoffed at, like, you don't belong here, like what's wrong with you? And I just think that's sad because that kind of turns people off to this experience of music when it's sort of this like, oh, I have to make sure my phone is off or I'm going to get in big trouble. I can't, I'm going to save my cough for in between pieces. So it really wasn't until I'm blanking on when exactly this happened. It was during Mozart's time, but it was really the sort of upper class that decided that basically funded this whole operation. That decided like, okay, this music's going to be this more complex highbrow thing now. We're going to have all these things like no clapping and blah blah blah. That's unfortunately kind of held through to today. So while we still it's not like dress down day or anything like that. Like there's still like a minimum, and we still observe like some of those practices, of course, out of respect for the person that's playing, but we're trying to make it more of a community experience, more of a social experience, more of a sharing experience, rather than this I don't want to say stiff, but that's the only word that's coming to mind. This sort of like rigid, this is how everything's going to go and it's going to be perfect. And if anything goes wrong, then it's going to be awful. We're trying to do the polar opposite of that.
Yeah, I love that. We took the marketing seminar together, which was founded by Seth Godin, and he talks about status a lot. And this brings me right back to that, where music was used as a tool to set status in a community or in a society.
Right.
And it has definitely um, perpetuated throughout the years.
Yes, definitely.
There was, you were talking about how you write daily. Would you call yourself a writer?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it doesn't feel like it, but I mean, I write every day, so I suppose by definition, I'm a writer then. It's one of those things that didn't feel intuitive at first. There was definitely some, you know, needing to push through some mental resistance in those first few, but yeah, no, I write every day. I write for myself. I do some like reflective writing every day. And I guess if somebody does plumbing, that makes them a plumber. So I do writing. So I guess I would be considered a writer, even though it doesn't feel like it in sort of the traditional term. But yeah.
Yeah. And then, like, what about your students? Like, do they call themselves musicians or do you call them musicians? Like, where in their experience within your program or even just in general? I don't know much about, like, I don't know. I think I call myself a viola player. I don't know when that happened.
Hmm.
When it transitioned from I play viola to I am a viola player. I think that there's like those two, a different way of centering that. But like, do you call your students musicians? Are they right like that from the get-go, or um how do you address them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. As often as we can, we try to encourage them to think of themselves as musicians. I think there's a lot to sort of fight through in that. I think society thinks that you need to attain a certain level of advanced before you're officially considered a musician. But, kind of like we're talking about with the writing thing, they're playing music from day, one. So, sort of by definition, they're a musician if they're like creating music off the page or from their memory or whatever. And we have a lot of students who actually this latest live recital we had some students who did their first recital after only like 5 lessons.
Mm.
So they're performing music for an audience, therefore they are a musician. Now, getting their parents or the kids themselves to see that, again, perceptions are a strong thing, but we're always trying to, encourage them to consider themselves musicians. It's not about, reaching this super high level and then you're, anointed officially as a musician, but you're playing music, so you're a musician.
Mm. I love that you're like, I'm just so happy that we met because I want like everyone to go, like, because we are in the same area, I want everyone to go to your piano school. And because the the
Thank you.
of course the turning music, I mean, arts is such a important component to our culture, to our individuality, and to be able to cultivate that within kids and to shift the narrative like at a young age, it's just I think that those are all so like such wonderful things that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, one thing I like to like kind of close up all of my interviews with is to ask this one question. And so I think a lot about truths and like things that we know to be completely true deep down in our bones. And I wanted to ask you if you could share a truth of yours with the audience.
Oh wow, what a profound question. I'll just share the first thing that comes to mind is my truth and my philosophy and all of this that has led to, starting my business is that anyone can learn to play music. There is no talent. There may be some getting it quicker than others, but there is no some people have it, some people don't. Literally anybody can learn how to play music. Everybody has the right to learn music. Everybody should have the opportunity to learn music. And it's really just a matter of finding that teacher who gets it, who's passionate about it, who's dedicated to it. And everyone deserves that. But it doesn't matter whether you see yourself as talented, not talented, if you have a keyboard, if you have a grand piano, if you're wealthy, if you're lower income, whatever. Literally anybody on this planet can learn music. It doesn't matter what age. We just had an adult student start who's 86. She's doing awesome. Anybody can do this. So that's been sort of my North Star that's led me to start South Shore Piano School, to really try to foster this in as many human beings as possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your truths and your philosophy and your approach, because I think that even if it's, someone who can't actually attend your school, they have received a different message than other schools are offering.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a fun conversation, and congratulations on your podcast. You ask some really great questions that dig deep into the heart of this. So thank you for those.
You're welcome. Now, if folks want to find you, where can they learn more about your school and what you're doing?
Sure. So the best place would probably be our website. It's southshorepianoschool.com. You can read more about myself, all of the other teachers that are working with us. We do a free trial lesson if anybody wants to come on in and just give us a try, no obligation. And we're also on all of the major social media channels. We have our YouTube channel, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Probably more Facebook and Instagram than Twitter, but the handle on all those is SS Piano School.
Thank you, Jonathan. I wish you all the best as you turn this world of music upside down.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You too.
Thank you for tuning in today. A great big thank you to Medfield TV for their support and editing this episode. Living an inspired life is a worthy endeavor. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Be sure to subscribe in your preferred podcast player for future real conversations. And if any part of this episode made you think of a friend, let them know that they aren't alone in their journey and share all the things with them. If you'd like to stay in touch, hop on over to lisaforreal.com and sign up for my daily blogs. Or find me on Instagram at Reclaiming Motherhood. See you next time.